You're listening to Untangled FM.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Healing Matters Show with myself, Sunita Pattani, on Untangled FM. So I hope you guys are ready, because today we have the most amazing journey lined up for you. It is, in my opinion, the most important journey that we will ever undertake. So fasten your seatbelts, because today we're taking a journey from atoms to awakening. And I'd like to welcome aboard the captain of our journey today, scientist and business and wellness coach, Jazz Rasool. Jazz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me, Sunita. It's an honour to be here.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to today's show, actually, because I know we've got loads of amazing things lined up. So let's get started. Now, to start off with, tell us a little bit about yourself. You were originally a scientist. How did you end up on this amazing sort of journey of merging together science and spirituality?
Well, I was brought up a Muslim and taught to read the Quran, but nobody explained to me what it was I was reading, so I ended up developing this great spatial memory, but unfortunately none of it was meaningful. So what I did was I ended up veering towards science, which did give me meaning, and I ended up studying physics, and within that I learned quantum physics, and that got me very interested in consciousness. So when I finished my physics degree, I went off to look at how the brain worked by doing a master's degree in molecular biology and drugs research, where I actually looked at how people suffered from epilepsy and what drugs were used to treat the brain. And you might know that when someone has epilepsy, they go through a shift in consciousness, but they also go through a shift in their body too. It's a mind-body effect that actually goes on. So I got very interested in how the mind and body affected each other. And as a consequence, a lot of colleges asked me to come and teach on mind-body medicine all over the world, in Europe, in America, and obviously, here in the UK. And eventually, even businesses got interested in it from a point of view of stress and vitality, and started asking me to come in and coach their employees. So it's got me to where I am now, with this strong interest on exactly how does the mind affect us, both physically and even beyond that, socially.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. So, and you mentioned, obviously, you started off from a religious perspective. Just out of interest, what is your view on God now that you've studied the science? What's your take on God?
Well, when I was doing my physics degree, I was studying quantum physics, and one of the experiments, I discovered that there was an effect where somebody was playing around with a particle, and another particle that it was related to that was far away seems to respond to that particle being affected, as if those two particles were not separate at all, but they were interconnected. Signals communicating between them faster than the speed of light. And I realized the only thing that this could possibly be related to is the idea that nothing in the universe is separate. Everything's interconnected. There almost seemed to be an intelligence operating between these particles. And, for want of a better word, I felt it was equivalent for what a lot of people call God. And it was funny, because I spent years getting away from religion, and here I was in the nitty-gritty end of nuclear physics, and I was discovering an experience of something that looked like universal sentience. So it was rather ironic.
Fantastic. I tend to ask my clients, actually, my guests, that quite often, because I get to speak to lots of different people, and it's really interesting getting their opinions on God, especially when they come from a scientific perspective. So, okay, interesting. Now, in the introduction, I mentioned that we were going to take a journey from atoms to awakening. So let's start off with the atoms. Now, first of all, what is energy, and what relevance does it have to us personally as human beings?
Well, many years ago, I was at a conference for the Research Council for Complementary Medicine in the UK, and I was amongst about 20 other practitioners, physicists, scientists, healers, and they were all talking about energy. It was a breakout group discussing energy, but they were all talking about it in very different ways. The scientists are talking about energy in terms of the ability to do work. Healers were talking about it in terms of relationships and transformation. And I had to put a stop to the proceedings. Look, we can't carry on unless we actually come up with a common definition of energy that we can all work with practically. And if you think about it, atoms, their energy is based on their relationships with one another, as well as their relationships between their internal components. And in life, it's the same. the energy a person has is based on their relationship with themselves, the relationship their internal physiology has, with different parts of itself, as well as the relationship that we have with people in our social context. So it seems that relationships are a really important part of understanding what energy actually is. And in the end, I actually provided a definition and said that energy is the quantity and the quality of relationship. That was it in a nutshell. Later on, I expanded it a little bit to make it much more practical and useful, and specifically talked about how it was about relationship across space, across time, and also with a specific intent or mindset. So there's a role, if you like, for intent in how energy appears in fundamental levels, at like quantum levels, for example, and how it actually operates across space and time. So energy, it looks like it's something to do with, obviously, with space and time, but it's more specifically and actively to do with how intent and how relationships are formed across space and time. So for healing purposes, for the healers, I actually said, well, energy is about the quantity and quality of relationship a person has within themselves and between themselves and others and other things in the environment. So clearly, if someone changes their relationship with themselves, their energy is going to change. But also, if they change their relationship with things around them, then obviously the energy is going to change again. So relationships, whether they're internal or external, are fundamental to understanding how energy appears and how it transforms.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never quite heard it, in that context before. So we'll revisit the term relationship in a while, but that's interesting because that's given me something to kind of think about. Now, okay, so we talked a little bit about energy. Now, you also talk about something called the adaptive response, and you have 3 aspects that you discussed when you talk about these responses. Can you share these with us?
Yeah, in psychology, when people are under stress or they are in a relaxed state, different kinds of biochemistry are going on in the body. When someone's experiencing stress, there's an aspect called the fight or flight state which kicked off in the body. And if someone feels they're in danger or they are angry or they're suffering from stress or strain of some kind, then typically biochemically in the body, that shows up by 3 parts in the brain working with one another to change the hormones in the body. And those 3 parts are the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary. They literally pick up signals from the front part of the brain and they convert them into hormones. And these hormones are effectively the stress response. They are things like adrenaline. There's something called cortisol, and as a result of these kinds of hormones, and there are other things like epinephrine, for example, norepinephrine, they literally go and change the nervous system and can even be transmitted ultimately down to DNA and change the way our genes express themselves. The relaxation response is actually kicked off by another part of the nervous system. The stress response is kicked off by what's known as the sympathetic nervous system. But the relaxation response is produced by the other part of the nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, it produces a different bunch of hormones to relax a person. Things like dopamine, for example. There's the substance, it's often called the love chemical, love hormone, which is oxytocin, and other morphine-like substances which reduce pain and give you a feeling of pleasure, which are known as endorphins. So those are the 2 responses. There's a stress response and then there's a relaxation response. Now, how those 2 exist in harmony with one another, whether one is being used excessively in the body or not, the proportions by which they are operating in the body, that's essentially your effective adaptation of whatever's happening. So the actual proportions of the stress response and the relaxation response currently going on in your body, that defines how you're currently adapting. And that overall thing, that overall response, the balance, if you will, that's called your adaptive response.
Okay, all right. So that's interesting. So you've talked about the different types of responses you've labelled there. Now, it's really interesting, actually, Jazz, because when you were talking about the stress response, and you talked about the sympathetic nervous system, I have done a fair amount of work with addictions in my practice as a psychotherapist. And I'm always really amazed with the way that addictions function. Now, I remember, I think a couple of years ago, I was watching TV and there was a program on about anorexia. And there was a scientist at one of the hospitals in London, and I can't remember which one. I think it might have been Maudsley Hospital, not sure. But anyway, he was talking about how some people have, a predetermined switch, almost, and that predetermined switch has to something triggers it, and that is what can contribute towards anorexia. So I'm just wondering whether there's any link, do you think, in your personal opinion, between, a stress response and how that might kind of work with addictions or eating disorders at all?
Well, it's not specifically about the stress response. It's again about that balance between the stress response and the relaxation response. It's about the adaptive response.
Right.
A long time ago, I tried to look at addiction from the simple point of view of psychology and psychiatry. And I personally, had a lot of clients who I was helping with a number of issues that they had. And what I realized was something really simple. When someone gets addicted to something, it's because they're making a mistake. It's kind of what's called a category mistake. They're making a mistake about something that they think is supporting them, but in fact it's doing nothing more than stimulating them. Now, if they mistake something that stimulates them and something that supports them, then over time they're going to see that as a necessity. And eventually what they're going to find is that the body gets used to that stimulation, it kind of gets adapted to it, and they need more and more of it in order to feel that they're supporting themselves. Now, this is certainly the case with alcohol. People know that alcohol has certain benefits for you to help you relax and so on. But if you keep using it in order for you to deal with stress, eventually your body just adapts and you need more and more of it in order to produce the same relaxation response. Unfortunately, at that point, a person's liver might have gone and they are in a position where something that stimulates them is far from being supportive. It's actually undermining them and destroying them. So it can also happen when you're not just consuming alcohol, but you could be consuming certain foods. Now, you eat certain foods, it releases certain chemicals into your body and your bloodstream, and you get a similar kind of effect. So the main thing that I discovered was that addiction seems to be a conscious thing initially, where people are mistaking something that's stimulating as something that's supportive, and they keep going on down that road, and eventually all they have is stimulation and no support, and the consequence is their body breaks down. Now, there are biochemical markers in the body that reflect that. When someone's being stimulated, certainly hormones are being released around the body, but if there isn't a corresponding relaxation response to support the body, then what happens over the long term is the body literally starts to break down because there isn't enough parasympathetic nervous system activity to help the body to repair. So it's critical that people, first of all, are weaned off the idea that something that stimulates them is actually supporting them. As soon as they realize that, and they do the opposite, which is they focus on things that support them until they get to a point where what it is that supports them, it might not be stimulating initially, but eventually it gives them so much life, it becomes stimulating. But this is the opposite of addiction. This is actually empowerment, it's well-being, where you're supporting yourself to enough of a degree that it becomes vitalizing, it becomes stimulating. So it's the opposite effect of addiction. And ideally, in well-being, and when you're trying to work with someone holistically, you want to give them the support they need that ultimately stimulates them into feeling more alive and more awake. And that's, of course, like I said, the opposite process of addiction.
Okay, that's fascinating. So when you're talking about addiction, let's say sort of when you come to the idea that, okay, you know you're addicted, and you know that you're wanting to break free. Now, I do recognise that obviously, you know, depending on what the addiction is, be it drugs or alcohol, you know, on a practical level, it may well require different intervention, you know, like you were talking about weaning off, that sort of thing. Biologically speaking, Jazz, what sort of process does the body go through when somebody actually stops engaging in that addictive behaviour?
Well, the relaxation response kicks in more than the stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system becomes more active. Now, one of the key activities of that response and of that part of the nervous system is that together with the endocrine system, which sends out hormones, and the immune system, it allows for repair to happen in the body. In terms of rebalancing the biochemistry of the body, helping clear up cells which, you know, have been decaying, but also taking care of cells which have gone rogue and started reproducing on their own in an inadvertent way, things that could eventually, you know, for example, become cancer cells. But probably the most amazing consequence of recovery is that when it's done right, you'll find that the changes don't just happen on a psychological level or just with the endocrine system and the immune system and the nervous system. Not do they all just refresh themselves and start to get better, but the end kind of result of all of that is that the hormones and the various transmitters that are being released in the body to do with things like oxytocin and dopamine, for example, the final effects of those actually reach right down into the cells, right down into the nucleus of the cell, and actually affect the way that genes actually express themselves. Proteins get released into the cell, and ultimately even, you know, affect how the person's longevity actually is nurtured.
Wow, that's quite profound, isn't it? Because you hear about addictions and, you know, we hear about what addictions do and really we tend to hear about, you know, recovery and what that means, but you very rarely do you actually hear about people talking about it on a cellular level and what that actually means. So, you know, breaking free from addictions actually changes you right down to cellular and DNA level. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the opposite is true as well. When you get addicted,
yeah,
your gene expression changes to a form which is not what you might call your authentic normal level of gene expression. So actually there's something really important there, which is this. If you're literally not being authentic, it's going to show up in your genes. And your body will try and produce a faithful representation of this version of yourself that's not authentic. Now, the consequence is that your immune system is going to look at that often and it will go, hang on a minute, this isn't self, this is foreign. And it can even kick off autoimmune issues and diseases. Now, the reverse of that is that when you start being true to yourself and start being authentic and being realistic and honouring yourself and kicking off the relaxation response, what happens is that the genes actually come to their native form of expression. They try and just do their best to represent what's going on in the person's consciousness in terms of authenticity. They're literally in a physical form trying to manifest your authenticity. That's what they're trying to do.
That's okay. So the word authenticity, when you use that word, what exactly do you mean by it? Because I often come across people that will say, you know, we'll talk about authentic selves and they're not entirely sure what their authentic self is. So can you explain to us what you mean by the term authenticity?
Well, Carl Jung and Freud, they had some very clear ideas on what it was to be human. They regard, Carl Jung, for example, would say that the face that we show the world, that's called our persona. But who we really are deep down within ourselves, what's called our individuated self, that is what's connected into our source, that's connected into what's true for us. It's not the broken bit or necessarily the bit that's got egotistical issues or things like that. It's what's beyond that. It's to do with our true character. And there's this thing in the middle, which is the ego, and it's also linked into the shadow. And basically what the ego does is it's like a lens. It projects your true character out into your persona and what people see, but it also projects what the world is like onto your true character. Now, you can imagine if that lens was dirty or was chipped or was distorted, it wouldn't project an accurate image of who you really are out into the world, nor would it actually project an accurate image of the world onto a person's the canvas of a person's character. And now, in that situation, it means that people can get the wrong idea about the world, but people can also get the wrong idea about a person because of what's being projected. So authentic self is, what's behind that lens. It's that canvas that is uncorrupted and is not being distorted in any kind of way. It hasn't got any stuff covering it up in terms of baggage or issues or things like that. It's literally our pure self. That's who that is, and that's often associated with the idea of the authentic self. But often when you get that level, it's always accompanied with aspects which are to do with vulnerability of you. So authenticity and vulnerability always walk hand in hand. Usually you can't get authenticity unless vulnerability is present, and vice versa. If you're being vulnerable, expect authenticity to be there too.
Okay, all right. And what do you think with authenticity? As a person is learning or becoming more authentic, not even learning to become authentic, but as a person's becoming more authentic, is it a case of you're authentic and you're not authentic, or is it a case of you gradually get in touch with your authenticity as time goes by?
It's not what some people might consider an overnight thing. It's not a quantum leap. You don't just throw a switch and you become authentic. That's not the way it works. We've got lessons to learn. There are things that we have blind spots around, and as a consequence, it takes time to discover those blind spots. For example, if you go to a restaurant and you eat food, and let's say you get a bit of food in your teeth, everybody starts looking funnily at you, and you don't know why. And you go to the bathroom, you look in the mirror, and you go, "Oh my God, I've got a bit of spinach stuck between my teeth." And you take it out, and you go back out, and everybody starts looking at you normally again, treats you normally. And it's the same process here. If you don't know what you're covered with, but other people can see it, then you're going to have issues to do with your relationships with yourself and also with other people. But if someone can give you a mirror psychologically, and you could see, "Oh, I've got this issue to do with my character, or I've got an issue with my anger or depression or something like that," then you can literally address that, and you'll find that literally when you go out back into the world, people start literally relating to you in a completely different way compared to where you were before, because now that thing that was covering you and wasn't really authentically you, that bit of psychological spinach, if you will, is gone, and now people look at you and treat you as a normal human being.
Okay, all right. That's actually a really great metaphor. If you have just tuned in, guys, you're listening to the Healing Matters show on Untangled FM with myself, Sunita Pattani, and today we're speaking to scientist and coach Jazz Rasool. Okay, Jazz, so far we've kind of started to look at the physical and scientific side of healing, and now I'd like to move along a little bit to the awakening side of things. Now, I've heard you use the terms consciousness and intent in the past when we've had previous conversations. In fact, actually, I come across these terms quite frequently through books, people, generally as we start to read around the topic. So can you tell us, first of all, the terms consciousness and intent, what are they? And secondly, what impact do they have on our physiology?
Well, consciousness is often associated with our awareness, what we're tuned into in the world, typically through our senses. What do we see, what do we hear, and so on. But in its kind of deepest understandings, consciousness is something which may exist separately from the body. And as a consequence, we can't just look at it in terms of physical, descriptive factors. We need to look at it in terms of other things too. So one of the things that it's often linked into is intent and attention. And your intent is something that has various dimensions to it. You could say that the intentions that you have and how you relate to them, if you were to consolidate them and bring them all together in terms of everything you've ever had any intentions around over your entire life, and you put them all in one bucket, then the sum of all those intentions and their effects what the end result is, and all the relationships that you've had with yourself and others through those intentions. The sum effect of all of that is what you end up with as your current state of consciousness. So consciousness is fundamentally down to your intentions and the consequent effect that they've created in your relationship with yourself and the world. So intent is very much, if you like, at the core of it, and attention, which is another kind of face, if you like, of intention, is something that relates to where your consciousness is currently focused. So one is to do with direction and magnitude, if you will, and the other is to do with the intensity of that intention and how strongly it's being applied in the actual world. So attention and intention together, they are related in a way where they create a kind of a tension between them. So there's attention, there's intention, and then there's tension between them.
Right.
And your consciousness can be defined as that tension. It's literally the tension between your intention and your attention. And as you change your attention, what you're focused on, and you change your intention, the purpose of what it is that you're actually doing, as you alter those two things, as that balance shifts, so your consciousness shifts. So if you want to transform your consciousness, it really comes down to changing the balance between your intentions that you follow through on and what you pay attention to as a consequence.
Okay, now that's interesting. So we're talking about intention. There are lots of people who experience the desire to change, and they set the intention, but they don't always manage to follow through. Why does that happen?
Well, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing research into exactly that issue. People set goals all the time, but they don't necessarily achieve them. But then there are other people who gather all these resources. They don't know what goal they want to achieve, but they do know that they're probably going to need some resources. They're going to need time, they're going to need money, they're going to need knowledge, and so on. And they gather all these resources, but they never set a goal. So
right.
On the one hand, you've got people who set goals but never find the resources to complete them. And on the other hand, you've got people who get together all the resources and they never actually channel them into a goal which makes a difference to their lives. And actually, this is very much how it is between West and East. In the West, people very much focus on goals and then run around trying to get the resources to complete them. And if they don't find them, the goal's not going to get completed. In the East,
right.
It's the other way around. Goals don't come first. Actually, energy or resources comes first. And you build as much of that as you can, and then one day you channel it into a dream or a goal. But if you don't find the goal, then your energy and your resources just languish and they start to stagnate. So both East and West have got their issues with regards to setting goals. But obviously, if you can work with your goals and energies together, not put one first and the other one second in a dynamic way, that's a much better way of achieving things. But in order for you to do that, you need to do one of three things in proportion. You need to get support of the right kind to help you. You need to also be pushed and stretched or challenged, if you will, in order to make sure you're resilient enough to cope with all the tasks that might come your way. And lastly, you have to take time out to reflect, because if you're going in the wrong direction, 100 miles an hour, then you need to be able to take stock and go, hang on a minute, we need to change course here. Now, when you get those things in the right proportions, you can achieve anything. If someone gives you the support you need and they allow you to grow and stretch the amount that you need, and that you're always making decisions based on things that you've really thought through and reflected on, then success is inevitable. When people fail, it's because they never got enough support, or they didn't get enough challenge, or they failed to reflect. Or they might have got those three things, but they didn't get them in the right proportions for the purpose that they're actually looking for. So I call those three things social vitamins, because they literally are like vitamins. You need to get your 3 a day. If you don't get the support you need every day, you don't get your recommended daily dose, if you like, of the support that you need and the challenge that you need and the reflection that you need, you don't grow, just like with normal vitamins. If you don't get them in the right proportions, you don't grow, your well-being suffers. But if you do, then you get to grow in a normal kind of way. But that also applies to your psychological and social life. If you can get the support, ideally from yourself, that's great. But just like with foods, you might have to supplement how you support and challenge yourself and reflect by getting those factors from other people. If you're really lucky, you'll find them all in one person, and that might end up being your best friend. It might be someone you marry. It might be someone you go into business with. Mm-hmm. But the recommendation is simple. Get your 3 a day. Get your support, challenge and reflection every day in the right proportions. Get your social vitamins, and you'll make it through to anything that you want to do.
You make it happen. This is slightly off topic, but I'm going to ask you because it's related to this question. What's your opinion on, so at the moment we're talking about intent and we're talking about goal setting and, what you can kind of do to kind of, even if it's from a health perspective, whatever it is, to kind of achieve that. There is a school of thought out there that sort of talks about the idea of letting go and having a look at how your path unfolds. Kind of the opposite to what you've just said. I was just kind of wondering what your opinion on that is.
Well, it's actually intimately related to those three things.
Okay.
One of the consequences of getting the right support and being challenged and stretched and having time for reflection is there comes a point where all the outstanding stuff from your past gets cleared up.
Okay.
And even your goals that you've set for yourself for the future, they've all been activated and they're all being worked on. So it means your attention is no longer split between dealing with things from your past and dealing with things for your future. And it means your attention can be fully focused on the present moment. Now, when all your energy is here in the present moment, it's not spread out thinly across your past and your future, you literally have more vitality because all your energy is here. And you're more present as well. Literally, you have more presence. Now, in science, they say if a lot of energy is gathered in a bit of space, then there'll be a lot of gravity or gravitational field will build up around that place. Now, that means certain individuals, when they recover their energy from their past and they start recovering their energy from their future because their goals are being realized, and it frees up that energy to arrive back here in the present moment, because they've got more energy here in the present moment, the physics says there must be an increasing gravitational field being created. Now, that literally the weight of that person's character increases here in the present moment. They literally have more presence, and they have more, technically they have more gravitas, they literally have more weight of character, and they're creating a dent in their space and time around them, and it's creating kind of a dip with a valley, if you will, within which everything starts to be drawn into and attracted into. So when people are not focusing on a goal anymore, trying to deal with their past, often things just turn up in front of them, and those are the things that they're meant to deal with. They turn up usually in terms of synchronicities or coincidences.
Right.
And when those synchronicities or coincidences are regular enough, they literally are no longer stepping stones. The stepping stones kind of merge into each other and become a path. So all you do is just deal with whatever turns up in front of you. You literally unfold the moment, and ideally that's where you want to end up in life. You want to be in a position where you're just living the moment, and you're learning and growing and responding to the moment and not having to be distracted by your past or by your future. Okay,
interesting. All right, okay, so coming back to the idea of relationships, because we briefly talked about this a little earlier on. Now, relationships, you've already mentioned, big term in reference to your work, especially where energy is concerned. Tell us why the term relationship is so important to healing. What are the different facets? You talked about relationships with ourselves and with others. How does that fit into the healing aspect of things?
Well, when I was teaching on mind-body medicine, the working substance of most practitioners who work in that field, whether they're healers or energy workers, whatever, their working substance is energy. And I I deliberately defined energy in terms of relationship and said, it's the quantity and quality of relationship. And I was very specific. I said it's with the quantity and quality of relationship within a system, namely a person, and between that system and others, between that person and others. Now, in a therapeutic situation where there's a practitioner and there's a patient, what that means is that if someone has genuinely transformed someone's energy and helped them to heal, there should have been a change in the relationship the practitioner has within themselves and also within the patient, obviously, but also there should have been a change in the relationship between the practitioner and the patient. Now, one of the things that's an outcome of this is that if genuine healing has taken place, then there shouldn't have just been a change in the client or in the patient. The practitioner should have transformed as well. They should have changed too. And for me, this was a litmus test. If someone said, I just healed this person, and then I asked them, how did you become healed? How did you change? And they said, nothing happened to me. And then I would say, well, healing didn't really take place. Something else happened, but that wasn't healing because it didn't, directly connect into a transformation of relationships. All the relationships are actually involved. So whether you're talking about quantum physics and atoms and how they get together to form molecules and how all those structures are determined by the flows of energy between them, or whether you're talking about human beings in a practitioner-patient situation, or whether you're talking about how a human being relates to society, fundamentally how they move through life is down to the moment-to-moment transformations of relationships, whether the relationships they have within themselves, to themselves, or the relationships they have between what's going on inside of them and what's going on outside of them, with other people.
Okay, that you know what I have to say, Jazz, that makes absolute sense because working as a psychotherapist, and I think I've worked with quite a few people, we must be talking, I think, probably in the hundreds by now. And I have to say, you're absolutely right when it comes to practitioner healing, because over time, and I'm sure every practitioner is different, but one of the things that I noticed was with every single person that I was working with, it really, really helped me to become a lot more compassionate in other areas of my life, if that kind of makes sense. And I think as you start to work, it's certainly in my profession, I think you see so many people kind of come in and you do develop a sense of almost non-judgmentalness in a funny sort of way, because when I meet people outside of practice now, it's kind of ingrained in me that we're all humans, we're going to make mistakes, and it really doesn't matter how bad the mistake is that you've made. If you have an intent to heal, you really do deserve to be given that chance, no matter, and I know some people may not agree with me, but no matter how many times you fail, you always have kind of that chance to, I guess, make things better again.
Well, when someone sculpts in stone or they carve in wood, when they take a little bit of wood off and they take a little bit of stone off and ultimately come up with the final sculpture that they're interested in, they don't look at that bit that they just lost and go, I just failed. No, it was necessary to remove that. It was necessary to not have that as part of the final consequence or final result. And failure and success, unfortunately, a lot of people don't look at them in the right way. If you want success, you need to look at it as the final sculpture. And failure is each of those little bits that you chip off that you don't need. Just because they're not there contributing to the final sculpture, it doesn't mean that there was no necessity to them or there was no use to them, and therefore because you worked with something that was useless, you were a failure. Now you need to look at it very specifically and go, actually there's a place for everything, and this thing, there's not a place for it here, there's a place for it off here. So failure needs to be looked at from the point of view, it's what you need to remove in order to be left with success.
That's a nice way of looking at it, isn't it? Okay, all right. Now, talking about healing, what are your 3 personal top tips for healing? Now, obviously, you do a lot of kind of, the mind-body medicine link. If you were to offer sort of 3 top tips to somebody about how they would go about beginning to heal themselves, either emotionally or physically, what would you say?
Well, I think it's all very much centered on what I mentioned earlier about the social vitamins. It pins on getting the right support. It also pins on you pushing yourself and challenging yourself and stretching yourself, and also on reflection. Now, there's some recent research which specifically looks at how psychology affects our genes and how they express themselves. And for people who've got long-standing conditions, which might even be linked down to how our genes express themselves, it's been found that there's a family of genes called immediate genes. Now, these immediate genes, they can be activated and they can change your body's chemistry within 2 hours if you can find a way of activating them. It turns out things like hypnotherapy and anything which involves a shift in perspective is something that can activate those immediate genes. Now, if you do laughter therapy, for example, that involves often, when you get a joke, it involves following a narrative and then shifting your perspective. Every time you shift perspective, that cascade of changes from your brain right down to your DNA gets activated. So shifting perspective is critical to activating that mind-body kind of pathway. If you are not approaching something with authenticity, you're not approaching it with the right intent, if you're not approaching it with the right level of attention and focus, then you're going to find that mind-body pathway is not going to get activated in a way where the relaxation response is generated and your body starts to repair itself. So number one, change your perspective.
Brilliant.
And do it in a way which gives you the right level of support and the right level of stretch and challenge, and also the right opportunity to just reflect and process and incubate what's going on. So those three things, if you do those three things in the right proportions, you'll find that your perspective will shift, and then there'll be a cascade of changes which affects your overall biology in your body, and that will lead to a shift in your symptoms. So that's the first thing, shift your perspective. The second is get some company. Because remember what I said about energy being about relationships?
Yeah.
There's lots of research to show that people who are lonely and spend excessive time on their own in a way which makes them not feel good, they actually lead shorter lives. People who live in communities or are part of religious communities or even part of a creative community, because they usually find support, they find challenge, and they find reflection in a much more bigger gene pool, if you like. The consequence is that they get all the shifts in perspective they need to keep their body in a healthy state. If they've got a healthy perspective, they're going to have a healthy body. And they can do that through their relationships, through the people they work with, the people they live with, the people that they pray with. Even in people who've got cancer, if they group together and support each other, there's a much higher likelihood that they're going to be able to suffer less from the cancer and its effects. So the second tip is get some company. Don't try and do it on your own. The more support you can get and challenge and reflection through your social situations, the more likely it is that your body is going to be able to be sustained in a state where it can relax for long enough for your body's repair mechanisms to kick in right down to the DNA level, and your symptoms will start to disappear.
Fabulous. Okay.
So the third one is actually to do with having a purpose and having something that you are moving towards in terms of, if you like, making a difference. Now, this is probably best phrase, I think, in terms of collaboration. Now, collaboration and being literate in how you literally collaborate with yourself is about you getting out of your own way so that you can find your way. A lot of people who are ill, within themselves somewhere or outside of themselves somewhere, they are getting in their own way. They are interfering with their body's natural healing mechanisms. As soon as they get out of their own way by learning how to collaborate with themselves and not get in their own way, they literally find their way. And if you can imagine groups of people who are getting on with themselves as individuals and who have found their way, coming together into a tribe of individuals who might not be in the same community, but they've got the same purpose, they've got the same intent, you find that having what I call a vibe tribe, people who are sharing the same vibe as you, but maybe geographically separate from you. So especially over social networks, that's certainly a possibility. That's really, really important. So finding a purpose that you can align yourself to make a difference to yourself and beyond yourself to the world. I wouldn't call it altruism. I'd call it more about creating an ecosystem. That's really what it's about. So that last tip is get yourself an ecosystem. Find something where you're doing something meaningful for yourself and you're getting out of your own way and you're hooking up with other people who are doing the same. You don't want to be hooking up with people who are getting in their own way because they're going to be very difficult ultimately to do anything positive towards you because they're going to always end up throwing a spanner in the works. So do your best not to spend time with people who get in their own way and who constantly seem to be losing their way because they're not ultimately going to be able to help you. As a practitioner, you might want to help them, of course. But if you're an individual and you want to heal quicker, then you need to be spending time with people who've got their act together a little bit. You don't want to be spending time with people who are breaking down or fragmenting. Now, you might be with people who've got the same condition as you, which is a different thing. If you're all trying to break through that condition together, then you can all kind of rub off on one another with regards to your momentum for healing. And that's a good thing. You do need to sometimes do that because those people will be able to relate to you. They'll resonate with you because you're all going through the same thing. So that's the third tip. So the first is change your perspective. Second, get your company. And third, choose a purpose to live by. And if you can, do it together, with other people who are working towards that common cause.
Got a bit tongue twisted there. Absolutely excellent, I meant to say. Okay, all right. Now, we're almost, Jazz, coming towards the end of the interview now. So for anybody who has just joined us, you actually can listen to the show again on the replay, which will be available on the Healing Matters page on untangledfm.com. If you want to find out more about Jazz or if you want to contact him, visit the website www.jazzrasool.com. Again, the website will be listed on the Untangled FM website. Jazz, is that the only website you have or do you have any other ones?
That's my personal site where you can find out about me and the various talks and webinars and things that I've done and any that might be coming up in the near future. My company site, which is taking everything I've learned over the last 10, 20 years and is focused on producing online technology to help people manage their well-being either at the individual level or in a social way. That site is energydiamond.com. So that you'll find lots of tools there which help you get a picture of your well-being and your mental health and can even link you up to other people whose vibe, if you will, is similar to yours that you could form tribes with and sustain your well-being at the individual level and maybe even work together with them to make a difference beyond yourselves. So energydiamond.com actually looks at the practical tools relating to all the things I've just been talking about.
Brilliant. Sounds fantastic. So, Jazz, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here with us today. It's been a very insightful interview.
Thank you very much, Sunita, for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of your audience.
More than welcome. So, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the Healing Matters show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so via the Untangled FM website. My name is Sunita Pattani, and I'll be back here with you again in a fortnight, same time, same place. Good night.
You're listening to Untangled FM.